I found out on a Tuesday. Not because she told me, because I pulled up my boarding pass and the reservation was gone. Cancelled. No notification, no email, no call. Just gone, like the 12 years I'd spent standing behind Rear Admiral Olivia Mercer didn't exist either. I was standing in the kitchen of our house in Norfolk, coffee cooling on the counter, laptop open, flight to Chicago already 30 minutes from departure. My brother Daniel's wedding. The one event I'd asked, begged, for 6 months of calendar clearance around. The one thing that was mine. And the reservation screen was blank. I called the airline first. Automated voice. Then a human. She confirmed the reservation had been cancelled from a registered account associated with my email. Except I hadn't touched it. I'd been at a contractor meeting all morning and hadn't opened my laptop since 7. There was something I still didn't know. Something that, when I found it out, made everything 10 times worse. I called Olivia. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted. The word, Daniel's wedding, typed out plain and waiting. 3 minutes passed. Then her aide, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Fletcher, texted me from his own number. Admiral Mercer is in a briefing and asks that you reschedule your personal travel. A VIP reception on Friday will require the residents to be prepared. She'll discuss with you tonight. I read that message 4 times. Ryan Fletcher, 28 years old, broad-shouldered, the man who'd been Olivia's aide for 14 months, had just texted me, her husband, to reschedule my brother's wedding. I didn't respond. I booked a new flight on my own card, departure in 2 hours, threw a bag together, and drove to the airport. In the car, my hands were steady. My jaw was tight. But I was thinking very clearly. Clearer than I'd been in a long time. Here's what I knew: in 3 months, from the day Olivia made Admiral, I would be deactivated as a person and converted into a prop. Her husband. The man who kept the house quiet and the residence presentable for visiting dignitaries. I had cut back my consulting work to support her career. I had attended 47 official functions in 18 months. I had smiled at men I didn't like, complimented programs I didn't believe in, and declined 2 significant project contracts because they conflicted with her posting schedule. I had done all of that freely, because I loved her and believed in what we were building. But no one had ever sent an aide to cancel my brother's wedding. On the flight to Chicago, I sat by the window and thought about what Ryan Fletcher's text actually meant. Not just the rudeness of it. The comfort of it. The fact that it was casual. Easy. Like this was an established arrangement, like Olivia had simply handed him the task without a second thought, and he'd done it without hesitation, because this was normal. This was how it worked now. By the end of that week, what I found would hollow me out and then rebuild me from different material. And I am going to tell you exactly how I made that happen. Daniel's wedding was on Saturday. I made it. I stood up as best man, gave a toast that made his new wife cry, danced badly at the reception, and kept my phone face down all night. Olivia had called twice by then. Not Ryan. Her. Both calls went to voicemail and I didn't retrieve them until Sunday morning. Justin, I know you're upset, the reception was a last-minute requirement from Fleet, Ryan was just handling logistics, we need to talk about this like adults. Like adults. The phrase landed with a specific weight. Like I was the one who'd behaved badly. I flew home Sunday. She wasn't at the house when I arrived. There was a note on the kitchen counter, actual handwriting, which meant she'd thought this gesture through, saying she'd be back by 8 and she hoped we could have a calm conversation. I used the hours between my arrival and 8 o'clock very productively. I went through our shared accounts. Not looking for anything specific. Or maybe I was, and I just hadn't admitted it yet. But something about the ease with which Ryan had handled the cancellation, the comfort of his text, the fact that Olivia had reached out to me personally only after I'd already left, something kept snagging at the back of my mind. Our credit card statements were joint. I found 6 dinners at Harborview, a restaurant in downtown Norfolk that costs about $200 for 2 people and requires a reservation a week in advance. 6 dinners over 5 months, all on weeknights when Olivia had told me she was at command dinners or overnight briefings at the Pentagon. The charge description always read the same: Harborview Rest, Norfolk, VA. No guest name on the card statement, obviously. But the dates aligned exactly with nights I'd been told she was unavailable. I checked her official calendar, which she'd shared with me years ago so I could coordinate around her schedule. 3 of those dates showed evening functions. 3 showed nothing, personal time, the calendar just said, which was unusual. Olivia didn't have personal time. Her schedule was orchestrated to the quarter hour. I didn't confront her that night. I wasn't ready. Not because I was afraid, I want to be clear about that, but because I didn't have enough yet, and I needed enough. I needed to be right before I said I was right, because once I said it, there was no version of this that ended with us going back to normal. I knew that already. She came home at 8:15. She was polished, even casually, linen trousers, the kind of self-possession that came from years of being the most senior person in any room. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and explained, with measured calm, that the VIP reception had been a fleet requirement that came down with 48 hours' notice, that she'd asked Ryan to handle the logistics because she was in a classified briefing, and that she understood I was upset but needed me to understand the reality of her position. I told her the flight cancellation wasn't the issue I was focused on anymore. She paused. Something moved behind her eyes, just briefly, like a door closing. I asked her about Harborview. Specifically, I asked who she'd been with on the 3 personal time evenings. She said a friend from the Naval War College, someone I hadn't met. A woman named Christine, going through a difficult divorce. Dinner, low-key, she hadn't mentioned it because it wasn't worth mentioning. She held my eyes the entire time she said it. That was the part that stayed with me. Not guilt, not deflection, eye contact, steady and practiced, the same expression she used when she testified before congressional subcommittees. I said I understood. I said I was tired from the travel. We went to bed without resolving anything, but on the surface, nothing was broken. She believed she'd handled it. I knew she hadn't. The next 3 days, I confirmed what I already suspected. I have a colleague, a former Army intelligence officer named Frank, who runs a private investigative practice in the D.C.-Virginia corridor. I've known him for 11 years. I called him Monday morning and gave him the specifics. I told him about Harborview, the dates, Ryan Fletcher's name and rank and assignment. I told him about the pattern I'd noticed, how Olivia's unavailability had increased in correlation with her promotion, how Ryan had been present at almost every official function for 14 months, how the physical space between them in photos had changed in ways that were subtle but consistent. Frank told me to give him 72 hours. He called me back in 48. Ryan Fletcher had used his personal vehicle, a dark blue SUV registered in his name, to visit our residence on 4 separate occasions between 1800 and 2200 hours on evenings when I was confirmed to be traveling for work. Frank had verified the vehicle from street-level observation and cross-referenced with my own travel records, which I provided. He also had photographs from Harborview, taken from across the street, time-stamped, of Olivia and Ryan arriving together on 2 of the 3 evenings I'd flagged. Arriving together and leaving together. One photograph showed Olivia's hand on his forearm in the parking lot. It was a small gesture. The kind of gesture you don't make with a subordinate. The last thing Frank told me was the thing I hadn't known. The thing that made everything 10 times worse. Olivia had added Ryan Fletcher to the lease extension on a separate condo in Norfolk's Ghent neighborhood, a property I hadn't known existed. It was registered under a property management LLC with one other listed member, Olivia's maiden name trust, which she'd established before our marriage and maintained separately. She was paying for a private residence. For them. I sat with that for a long time. Not because it was unclear, but because of the specific architecture of it. The trust, the LLC, the separate address, this wasn't impulsive. This had been built, methodically, by a woman who was exceptionally good at logistics. The same skills that made her effective in command had been applied here, precisely and without sentiment. 3 years. She had been planning something for 3 years. I made a list. Then I checked it against every fact I had. Then I called 3 people. The first was my personal attorney, a woman named Carol Whitfield who handles high-asset divorce cases in Virginia. I'd used her before on a business matter and trusted her judgment completely. I told her everything. She told me Virginia is an at-fault divorce state, and adultery, when documented, is grounds with significant implications for equitable distribution. She asked if I wanted to file immediately or wait. I told her I needed 1 week. The second call was to my financial advisor. I had my own investment accounts, separate from our joint holdings, and I wanted clarity on exactly what was joint and what was mine before anything was filed. I also wanted to understand the implications for my own assets given my reduced consulting income over the past 3 years, which had been a sacrifice made explicitly to support Olivia's career advancement. Carol had already told me that documented financial sacrifice in support of a spouse's career was relevant to Virginia courts. I made sure I had records. The third call was to Admiral Walter Greer, the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, whom I had met at a dozen official functions over 2 years and with whom I'd developed what I'd describe as a genuine professional respect. Not a friend exactly, but a man who'd told me twice, directly, that he thought I was one of the sharpest non-military people he'd encountered in naval circles. I called him not to report anything, I want to be precise about that, but to ask him a procedural question about the UCMJ and what its provisions were for officers who engaged in documented adultery with enlisted subordinates. Fletcher was not enlisted. He was a commissioned officer. But his relationship with Olivia constituted a fraternization violation under Article 134, which covers conduct unbecoming, and an adultery violation under the same statute. I wasn't reporting. I was asking about the process. Walter Greer, to his credit, understood exactly what I was telling him without me having to say it directly. He thanked me for the call. He told me he appreciated my discretion. He told me the process was clear and that if documentation existed, it would follow its own course through proper channels. I still hadn't played my final card. I was saving that for when it would hurt the most. I went home that night and cooked dinner. Olivia arrived at 7, surprised to find the table set. We ate. She talked about a fleet readiness review. I asked questions, listened, refilled her water glass. She relaxed. She thought we were recovering. I let her think that, because I needed 4 more days. By Wednesday, Carol had the divorce filing prepared. By Thursday, Frank had delivered the full documentation package, photographs, vehicle records, the property management LLC filing, screenshots of the Harborview reservations pulled from a review platform where someone had tagged them in a group dinner photo. Everything organized, time-stamped, and ready. Thursday morning, I called the Norfolk Fleet Command's ethics line. I did not identify myself by name on that call. I indicated that documented evidence of a fraternization and adultery violation involving a senior flag officer existed and would be transmitted to the appropriate Inspector General office. I provided Ryan Fletcher's name and Olivia's rank. I told them the documentation would arrive via Carol's office by end of business Friday through a formal legal channel. By Thursday afternoon, I learned from Frank, who had a contact inside the command building, that Ryan Fletcher had been summoned to a meeting with the base legal officer. That he had arrived at that meeting visibly shaken. That he had left it 40 minutes later and immediately placed 3 calls, all to the same number. Olivia's personal cell. She called me at 4:30 Thursday afternoon. The controlled tone she'd maintained all week was slightly frayed at the edges, though she was working to hold it together. "I need you to come home," she said. "We need to talk." "I'm on my way," I said. She was standing in the living room when I arrived, still in her uniform, the one with the stars on the shoulder boards that I'd watched her earn over 12 years of our marriage. She was very still. She'd been doing calculations. "The ethics office contacted my aide today," she said, not framing it as an accusation yet. "Testing." "I know," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Justin, I'm going to stop you," I said. "Before you construct whatever this conversation was going to be, I want you to know that I have the Harborview photographs. I have Frank's surveillance report. I have the LLC filing for the Ghent condo. I have Fletcher's vehicle records from our street. And I have Carol Whitfield's completed filing sitting in her office ready to be submitted to the Norfolk Circuit Court first thing Friday morning." I paused. "Now you can talk." The silence that followed was longer than any silence I'd experienced in that house. She sat down. She didn't cry, Olivia didn't cry easily, but something in her posture changed. The command bearing that had been with her since the day she pinned Admiral dropped out of her shoulders. She said she hadn't meant for it to become what it became. She said Ryan had been there during an extremely difficult period after her promotion, that the pressure had been isolating, that I was always traveling or focused on my work, that it had started as conversation and become something else gradually. I let her talk. I wanted the full accounting, not to be cruel, but because I'd given 12 years of my life to this woman and I deserved the accurate version of events. She told me it had started approximately 22 months ago. Not 3 years. But the condo, she admitted, had been set up 8 months in, meaning the thing I'd thought was impulsive had in fact been converted into infrastructure within a year of its start. She had been maintaining a second residence, splitting her personal time between it and our home, for over a year. 22 months. She had done this for 22 months. I listened until she finished. Then I told her 3 things. First, I told her that Carol's filing would be submitted in the morning regardless of this conversation, because there was nothing she could say that changed the documented facts. Second, I told her that the ethics documentation had already been transmitted through proper legal channels, and that process would also follow its course regardless of this conversation. Third, I told her that I hoped the career she had built, which I had supported, would survive what was coming. Not sarcastically. Not as a threat. I meant it. Olivia was a brilliant naval officer, and whatever she had done to me personally, her professional record was real. But I also told her, plainly, that I was not going to protect her from the professional consequences of her own choices. That was hers to manage. Then I went upstairs, pulled my already packed bag from the closet. I'd packed it Tuesday, methodically, room by room, and told her I'd be staying at Frank's while the legal process moved forward. I was at the door before she spoke again. Justin. Her voice had lost all its professional shaping. She sounded, for the first time and I couldn't remember how long, like a person rather than an admiral. I'm sorry. I stood at the door for a moment. I believed her. I also knew that sorry was the accurate word for what she felt, not remorse for the act itself but for the consequence she was now inside. Those are different things. I'd learned to tell them apart. I know, I said. And I walked out. What happened in the weeks after moved faster than I expected, and also exactly as I had planned. Carol filed Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, the Norfolk Virginian pilot had a source, anonymous item noting that a senior naval officer at Fleet Forces Command was under review for conduct violations. No name yet, but the naval community in Hampton Roads is approximately the size of a small town, and by Saturday, 3 people I knew had texted me variations of the same question worded carefully enough to suggest they already knew the answer. The Inspector General process moved on its own timeline, separate from mine, and I want to be clear that I didn't orchestrate what happened next, I simply created the conditions for it to happen. Ryan Fletcher was reassigned within 10 days, removed from the Admiral's staff and transferred to a shore installation in Pensacola pending the completion of the IG review. The transfer itself was consequence. The IG process was ongoing and whatever it ultimately determined was not within my control or interest to influence further. I provided documentation. The Navy's mechanisms were their own. The divorce filing, once it was served, produced the reaction I'd expected. Olivia retained counsel immediately. Commander Martin Holt, retired, now one of the top military divorce attorneys in Virginia. Carol knew him. She told me he was formidable. I told her I had a thick file. She told me that would help. The Ghent condo became a central document in the proceedings. Olivia's argument was that the trust and LLC predated our marriage and therefore the property was separate. Carol's counter was that the trust had been used to facilitate an extramarital relationship, which under Virginia law created a specific set of equitable distribution implications. I wasn't trying to take everything. That was never the point. I wanted fair accounting for 12 years of documented sacrifice, the contract reductions, the relocation costs, the 47 official functions, and I wanted the judge to see clearly what those 12 years had actually contained. The hearing was in October. I wore the suit I'd bought for Daniel's wedding and sat next to Carol and said nothing unless asked a direct question. Martin Holt was, as advertised, formidable. He had a precise, efficient way of framing the financial picture that minimized my contributions and emphasized Olivia's military compensation. Carol had anticipated every angle. When the judge asked me directly whether I had any statement to make before she entered her recommendation, I said the following: I had supported my wife's career because I believed in her and because I believed that's what marriage required. I had not done it as a transaction. But I had done it, and the record showed what it had cost me professionally, financially, and personally. I asked only that those costs be acknowledged. The judge acknowledged them. The settlement reflected it. I'm not going to put a specific dollar figure on what was settled, because that's not the part of this that matters. What mattered was that Carol got me fair value for 3 years of reduced consulting income, a percentage of the equitable home value, and full legal costs. The marriage was dissolved in November. By then, I had already begun rebuilding. The 2 contracts I'd declined in previous years, one with a defense logistics firm in Arlington, one with a maritime security consultancy based in Houston, had both moved on. But Frank, who knew more people than anyone I'd ever met, had connected me with a third opportunity, a strategic advisory role with a bipartisan policy institute in D.C., focused on naval infrastructure and supply chain resilience. The role fit my background precisely, paid well, and had nothing to do with Norfolk or the naval social ecosystem I'd spent 12 years navigating on Olivia's behalf. I took the position in December. I moved to D.C. in January. I slept through the night for the first time in what felt like years on my second night in the new apartment. Not a dramatic thing, I just woke up and 8 hours had passed and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like the previous day's unfinished business was actually finished. Like the inventory of waiting was closed. Daniel called in February. He told me he'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Olivia had been formally censured by the Navy following the IG investigation's findings. Not dismissed, her record and rank offered some protection, but formally censured, which would follow her file and effectively cap her advancement. She had made Admiral. She would not make Vice Admiral. Whatever she'd traded for the relationship with Ryan Fletcher, that was the final price. Daniel told me this carefully, checking how I'd receive it. I told him I hoped she was okay. I meant it. I don't say that as a performance of maturity, I say it because it was true. Olivia had done a specific and serious thing to me and I'd responded with proportionate clarity, and at the end of that process I had no remaining feeling for her that resembled either love or hatred. What I had was the quiet of completion. She was a chapter that had closed. I ran into Walter Greer at a policy event in March, one of those DC evenings where every conversation is doing 3 things simultaneously and the appetizers are better than the dinner. He found me at the bar, ordered a club soda, and told me he respected how I'd handled the situation. He said that in 32 years of naval service he'd seen men handle similar circumstances in ways that were destructive to everyone involved, and that I had navigated it with unusual intelligence and restraint. He used the word restraint in a way that acknowledged what it had taken. I thanked him. We talked for 20 minutes about maritime policy and a bipartisan bill moving through the Senate Armed Services Committee. It was a good conversation. The kind I had more of now, with people who engaged with me as myself rather than as an appendage to someone else's career. In April, I was at a conference in Annapolis, Supply Chain and Naval Readiness, the kind of conference that would have bored me 6 years ago and now struck me as genuinely engaging, and met a woman named Rachel, who worked as a legal analyst for the House Armed Services Committee. We talked for 2 hours about contracting reform and then about hiking, because it turned out we'd both done the same section of the Appalachian Trail in separate decades. She laughed easily and disagreed with me directly and didn't know who Olivia Mercer was, which turned out to be a more significant quality than I'd realized I'd been looking for. I'm not telling this as a romantic resolution, because it's too soon for that and I distrust any story that tied up neatly in that direction. What I'm saying is that the version of my life that exists now, the one where I take cases that interest me, eat dinners I choose, sleep through the night, and have conversations with people who see me clearly, that version exists because of a Tuesday in October when my flight reservation was gone and I understood, standing in the kitchen with my coffee going cold, that something had been wrong for a long time and I was finally going to stop pretending it wasn't. I don't think about Olivia anymore. The last I heard, and I heard it secondhand, from Frank, who hears everything, Ryan Fletcher's assignment in Pensacola had not gone well. He'd requested a voluntary separation from the Navy 6 months into his transfer and been processing out as of spring. Olivia, from what I understand, was still serving at a reduced capacity, the censure in her file, the promotion ceiling visible. I have no feeling about either of those facts. Not satisfaction, not pity. They made choices and the choices made consequences, and those consequences belong to them. I had a conversation with Daniel last week. He asked if I'd found whatever I was looking for after the divorce. I told him I hadn't been looking for anything. I'd been becoming something, a version of myself that had been interrupted 12 years ago and was now continuing where it had left off. He said that was a strange way to put it. I said maybe. The chapter is closed. The next one is better than anything I could have written before. And if I'm honest, standing here, in this apartment that is mine, in this life that was rebuilt from documented facts and clear decisions and no pretending, I think I should probably thank Olivia for finally showing me what I was working with. I won't. But I think about it sometimes.